Hi everybody, my name is Dennis and welcome back to another album review. Today we are reviewing Scaled and Icy by 21 Pilots, the newest record from this very interesting group that has had quite the run of albums lately. Most of which I'm not the biggest fan of, to be honest. I think their debut is just kind of so-so. Vessel had some solid tracks on it, but still wasn't anything amazing. Kind of a similar story with Blurry Face. But once Blurry Face came out, there started to be a bit more interesting talk around them, where things got a lot more conceptual, a lot more grand, and a lot more thought-provoking in some of the themes. And I still thought there was a lot of work to go off of Blurry Face. There was still a lot wrong with that album in my mind, but when they came out with Trench, people who've been watching my channel for a while may remember my review of Trench, and I was thoroughly surprised. I thought it was their best album at the time. It was one of my favorite albums of that year, and I still think that it is a phenomenal record in essentially every aspect. I love so many elements of that album, and it really capitalized on all this potential they'd been showing over the past few years. So hearing that they were going to release a new album this year, I was very curious to see how they were going to develop from Trench. Were they going to stick with the themes that they had been discussing over this record in Blurry Face? Were they going to kind of break away and start doing something a little different? Is it going to be just as experimental and outgoing and interesting? Are they going to maybe take a few steps back? I don't know. And as soon as I started hearing the singles, I got worried. The debut single of Shy Away, or not the debut, but the first single off of this record, Shy Away, was fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but to me it rang like just kind of a run of the mill 70s inspired indie alternative pop song, much in the line of someone like The Killers, where it's this kind of thing is not bad. It's just been done so many times that it doesn't really feel like anything all that special. The tune falls a bit flat in the choruses, or in the verses. The choruses do pick up a bit with a bit more grand instrumentation, but it still ends up being a bit of a slog, if I'm being honest. And I didn't think it was bad. And I had similar feelings about some of the singles to Trench that ended up being some of my favorite songs that year, so I was willing to let it grow on me once the album itself came out. And then I heard Choker, and I got even more worried because I thought it was frankly awful. I thought that the instrumentals were skeletal, boring, and uninteresting. I thought the vocal performance was whiny and really difficult to stomach. The chorus is really just an annoying mess from start to finish, and there's so little tune, there's so little personality, there's just nothing to really grasp onto here. Not even in the lyrics, where it's, about kind of this feeling of anxiety and being alone, where it's like, you're a choker in the sense of almost you're choking on your own feelings, you can't overcome these negative emotions, which, could be an interesting thing in concept, but just nothing is done with that topic on the song that these guys didn't do miles better on Trench. The way Trench dealt with various mental health issues was phenomenal. And I don't want this to just be a direct comparison between this and Trench, because that's not fair to this album. They are two very different records, but it's still something that I noticed. But still, I was crossing my fingers. I was hoping that these were going to be the exceptions on this record. And they really weren't, unfortunately. It's kind of a similar story for most of this album. That's not to say it's without its highlights. I thought the opening track, Good Day, was actually quite nice. To me, it had the catchiest instrumental across the entire album. It is fun, it is upbeat, it is cheerful, it's kind of that thing that effortlessly puts a smile on your face. It's just a really pleasant tune, and I like kind of the antithesis here with the lyrics being about, how everything is going wrong and everything is going awful, but still kind of appreciating, at least I'm alive, it's another day, and that makes it a good day. My wife left me, she took the kid, my friend is suing me, all this stuff is going wrong, but you know what? I'm alright. The weather's fine, it's a good day. And it does kind of ring of toxic positivity to an extent where you're kind of just have a loss of reality. Like you're not grasping reality in the moment. But it's effortlessly just fun. It's a happy song, even if the lyrics are a bit downer. But I like the way that kind of works against it. It ends up just being a really pleasant track overall. I've already talked about Choker and Shy Away, which are the next two tracks on the album. And like I said, I wanted them to grow on me, but they really didn't. Choker, if anything, has just gotten worse for me the more I listen to it, and Shy Away is still just kind of okay to me. The Outside is another track I did enjoy more than I expected, probably. It isn't anything like outstanding, but I just can't help myself from getting into the groove of this song. The lyrics are kind of silly, where it's like, oh, we're on the outside. It's like a criticism of the music industry, the direction it's going, and the direction that it maybe wants them to go in. You know, saying how they're so much on the outside, which is weird for an album that has so many songs that just sound like most other throwback alternative pop songs that are being made these days. So I don't really see how they're that much on the outside here, but it's a fun track overall. I like the rap verse at the end of it, even if again I think the lyrics are a little goofy. I like the sound of it. I think it has a really fun groove to it. I think he sounds good over that bassy instrumental. You have these nice little like guitar licks here and there that again have that very 70s sound, but it works. It works here, and it just ends up being a fun track for me overall. Saturday seems to have slowly become the more popular song off of this album, and I can kind of see why. It definitely has one of the catchier melodies, and I think the instrumental does have some good elements to it. But overall, there's just a lot of elements here that I don't like also. It's not a bad song by any means, but again, it's a similar story to Shy Away, where I just don't think it's anything all that special. The tune is a bit flat at times. But another thing about this one is I really don't like the group vocals. There's these group vocals in the chorus, like the Saturday, 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 that I just think sound bad. I don't like the way that it melds together. I don't like the way the voices overlap each other. It doesn't work with the instrumental. It just sounds a bit unpleasant. And one thing, and it's a little thing, but it's one thing that probably bothers me on this song more than anything, is towards the end of it, there are two times where there are just these random cuts in the song, where it's like, he says like, let's get loud, and there's just like this weird pause in the middle of the song. And like I was talking about it with a friend of mine before, and he was saying like that he thought he thought it was just his headphones like disconnecting for a second, and I'm like, no, that's the song. That's nothing wrong with your headphones. And he's like, oh, they left that in? Like, it's so off-putting that it makes people think that it's a mistake. Like, clearly that it shouldn't have been there. Just have the song progress normally. It messes with the pacing. It's incredibly distracting. It takes you out of any sort of immersion you get in the music. And it's a song that I already thought was kind of just okay, but it just, that part, I just hate that part. I really hate that part. It's not a bad song overall, but I just really don't like that part. Never Take It is one of the more difficult tracks to stomach on here. Instrumentally, it's nothing awful. It is a bit bland, on the blander side of things, but lyrically is by far the worst track on this album. It rings of like political commentary where it's like, oh, they're trying to do this to us and they're trying to impose these things on us. But, we're not going to take it. We're not going to do that. We're going to stand up for us. But the thing is, when you think about it, you could literally apply everything they're saying on here to any sort of political ideology ever, and it would still work. So if you're making some sort of political statement, at least that's what it sounds like to me. We're trying to make some sort of political statement of, standing up for what you believe in, but you don't have the guts to actually, like, commit to anything, and you just make it to where, like, people, like, if a socialist and an anti-vaxxer can both relate to your political message, I think something's kind of wrong there. But, I don't know, maybe that's just me. It just seems really toothless, and like they weren't willing to commit to anything. It just sounds really goofy. I think the lyrics are just laughably bad, honestly. Mulberry Street I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. It's kind of in the same ballpark as Shy Away and Saturday, where it's okay, but it just is again kind of a lifeless alt pop song that sounds like most other alt pop songs. So I don't know. I find myself, instead of getting bored of the tune like I did with those, I guess instead of finding the tune drab, I find the tune to get a bit repetitive and drawn out about halfway through the track whenever I listen to this one. At first, I'm always thinking, well, it's not so bad. I don't see why I didn't like it so much. But then when I get to about the halfway point, I'm like, all right, I'm kind of starting to get sick of this instrumental. I wish it would, do something a little different, maybe have something a bit more engaging to maybe beef up that tune a bit more. But I don't know. You have kind of the overly cheery aspects of it that don't have the same charm as something like Good Day, on top of some kind of annoying hand clappy percussion. It just doesn't do a whole lot for me. Formidable was another one of the weaker tracks on here in my mind. It's kind of like that old nostalgic like ballad that a rock band would play that everyone kind of thinks it's awful, but it still gets overplayed everywhere. That's what it makes me think of. It's like, when you take some old like 70s big hair, metal band, and then they decide to do a ballad and it just ends up sounding really cheesy. I don't know, maybe a better description would be like, some of the Eagles' deeper cuts where it's just really bland, sappy, and overly sentimental in every respect. It's like just trying way too hard to hit that aesthetic, and it just sounds really bad because of it. Bounce Man, I have a bit of complicated feelings on. I think the verses are actually quite nice, and I would have liked to see them explore that sound a lot more. They are subtle, they are pretty, they are really pleasant. It has a much nicer vocal performance than I feel like he gives on many of the other tracks on this record. It's much more low key, it's much more personal sounding, it's very, very, again, that subtlety to it, kind of that calmness. You don't have those like annoying shrill group vocals of other tracks that I've mentioned. You don't have kind of the whininess of something like Choker, but it's much more pleasant and subtle, and you have these very light, I'm pretty sure ukulele acoustics going on. But then you get to the chorus. The chorus is awful. I think the chorus on Bounce Man is frankly awful. Again, it has those group vocals that are just so difficult to stomach. And it just ruins what would be a really pleasant change of pace for this album. You start getting these hand clappy moments in there, those awful group vocals, and just the ukulele loses all its subtlety and it becomes the forefront, and it just becomes so much more grating. I liked it so much better when it was kind of just lightly in the background, adding a little bit to this otherwise really simple, easygoing song, and I wish it kept that subtlety throughout, because it just tries way too hard on the chorus, and it frankly ruins the song for me. No Chances is also pretty bad. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one. I just think the chorus is awful. I think it's annoying, and it's what Trench would sound like if Trench was a bad album. I mean, that I don't really have a whole lot to say. It's really just trying way too hard to be epic, and the transitions between, those grand, like, deep, look how cool we are moments to the, like the much more blissful, easygoing moments. The transitions are frankly not even there. It just comes off as really disjointed, and it's a difficult listen. But the more easygoing moments are definitely preferable to the epic moments that just sound like they're trying way too hard. However, Redecorate, the closing track on this album, is actually surprisingly great. I really love the instrumental on here. It's kind of captures that subtlety that I liked on other songs while still having a much stronger presence, Something like Bounce Man, I liked the subtlety, but it was because the instrumental didn't have as strong of a presence, and it kind of let, Tyler just do his thing vocally, which was really nice. Redecorate, on the other hand, has a much more present instrumental. It's much more in the forefront of things, and it's really gripping and captivating in my mind. And on top of that, I think this is debatably the best vocal performance across the entire album. And not only that, but it is easily the best song lyrically by a mile. By a mile. You have this really, really interesting metaphor this kind of symbolism where the state of one's room is meant to parallel to the state of their mind, where you're trying to maybe grow from an event, you're trying to grow from things, and then but it's difficult. You need to take that time to kind of redecorate your room. And then you realize that time is kind of running out to do stuff, and you're saying, no, no, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to live like this. Just let me clean my room. I don't want to go like this. Just please let me clean my room. Where you have this messy room that parallels your messy mental state, and you realize you don't want to go on like this anymore, and it's time for you to just bite the bullet and clean up. It's a really, really thought-provoking metaphor that I think he expands on quite nicely throughout the track. It's definitely worth looking into. I know I thought it was incredibly captivating, and what I was describing is really kind of just the surface level of what he's talking about on the track, but it's a really, really interesting symbol that he uses, and I loved the creativity. I loved the power and the passion in the chorus vocals. I loved the really hard-hitting instrumental. It really just struck a chord with me, and it was probably my favorite song on the record because of it. But yeah, that's kind of what I thought of each track on here. The album was definitely a disappointment for me. I can't lie. It was definitely a disappointment. It did have its moments where it shined quite brightly, and it did have its moments that I thought had potential even if they didn't quite reach their fullest. But at the same time, I thought the album just had a lot of questionable decisions. It lacked a lot of the same creativity and kind of forward-thinking elements that I loved off of Trench. Lyrically, it completely abandons the entire concept. And I've heard people say, like, oh, well, it's, propaganda for Dima, and it's, they're under the control of the demons there, and I can see what people are saying at points, but for the most part I find those comparisons to feel like kind of a stretch. And if that is what they're going for, I really don't think 21 Pilots did a good job of captivating that. So it doesn't really expand on the narrative at all, but honestly that's okay. You don't need to have a really in-depth concept to be a great album. If this song just had if this album just had a lot of really enjoyable songs on it, I would have been more than happy. But unfortunately, I just think a lot of the songs on here come off as more bland and uninteresting than really, captivating. So overall, I'm feeling a light 5 on this one. If you listen to the album, be sure to tell me what you thought of it down in the comments below. Be sure to tell me how wrong my opinion is, as always, and I'll see you in the next review.